Going.
Okay. So today our guest enricher is Jennifer Kahnweiler. So I want you to think about a team that you're involved in. Could be a work team, a volunteer team, maybe even a social team. Do you have one? Everybody got a team in mind? Okay, now what would it look like if you could double the effectiveness of that team? Our speaker today says you can do that by simply tapping into the wisdom and influence of the quiet 50%. The introverts that make up half the population and half of your teams. Jennifer Kahnweiler, PhD, CSP, is an author and global speaker who's called the champion for introverts. Her best-selling books, The Introverted Leader, Quiet Influence, and The Genius of Opposites, has been translated into 16 languages. Jennifer has consulted with hundreds of organizations, including GE, NASA, and the CDC. She has run leadership programs from Singapore to Spain and has been featured in Forbes, Time Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. While Jennifer herself is an extrovert, her husband Bill is an introvert. And side note, he'd like to thank us for bringing her here, so he can finally get some quiet time. Today, she is going to show you introverts how to build on your natural strengths, and you extroverts how to harness all of that introvert talent. And she will be signing her book immediately after this program. Please help me welcome Jennifer.
So, hi everybody. So I thought I would have Christy read my normal intro that I do, that I hand out, just so you can see kind of what I include. So I'm so happy to be in this large crowd today with our water people there.
I
have a hand up.
There's audience outside. Right?
I love it. They're making me feel comfortable with an audience. You know, we all like to perform, right? So here you go, Christy. So I thought I'm going to be going to Influence tomorrow, which is, I'm very excited. I've been to a number of I'm a 10-year member of NSA, and I've been to a lot of the conferences. And tomorrow I'm very excited because on Sunday I'll be presenting a program with a colleague of mine, Dirk Eilard from Eilard Academy. And he and I did a joint program in Berlin about 2 years ago. And I've had a lot of really fortunate experience. As Christy said, I'm focusing on introverts and introverted leaders. And one of the things I've been able to do is to kind of build on the books having gotten out into the zeitgeist, if you will, to use a German word. I've been able to do some training and speaking, which are both really the parts of my business of how I make that run as I speak, and I do training programs on the topic of how do companies bring out the best in introverts and how introverted leaders don't change who they are but really build on that strength. And I use a lot of research and stories, etc. So Dirk and I collaborated, and it was one of the best partnerships I've ever had. Now, how many of you have partnered with anybody to do either some speaking or training, or in your businesses partnered? Can I see a show of hands? Are any of you in a relationship? To me, and I'll just say a couple of aside things about my business too, and I want to answer questions of you guys too, because as I said, I've been around this business for a while, is that I think for me, if I look back on what has really grown my business, whether it's been here in the States or now more globally, it has always been to form a partnership with another speaker or another consulting firm, or in some cases an organization. You have Christy as well.
My business today, I would say 90% of it comes through, directly or indirectly, through some form of partnership.
Yeah. And there's a number of reasons for that, but one of the things that I think for me is that I feel like I learn every time so much from working with somebody else. And in the case of what we're going to be talking about, our topic on Sunday is going to be about how do you have a successful global partnership to deliver a training program overseas. So what Dirk and I did is, because the program went really well, we had about 16 coaches came for a 5-day intensive, and then he and I, stayed connected and looked at ways in which we are still, ways that we can continue the partnership. Now, I have spoken and done training programs in many other countries, and they've gone from abysmally to really well, and I would say he was at the top of the list. So we looked back and we said, what were the what were the key factors for success in making this really work? And he's kind of a fun guy, and he came up with this idea, Jennifer, it's like an octopus. Octopuses can be like mean and foreboding and grab us and have that kind of ugly look, or it could be a cute little octopus. And so we're going to frame this octopus model on Sunday, and I'm just going to kind of walk you guys through it and have you try it on. But I wanted to start out just with telling you sort of the first disconnect that Dirk and I had. And it was really quite amusing. I had just signed the contract with him. It was back in November, a few months before I was going to deliver the April class. And I was very excited because we had just signed it, and I go on my computer to read the write-up on the website. And I turn it on, and I start looking, and I push the button for Google Translate. Anybody ever use Google Translate? Mm-hmm. It's a way to kind of say, okay. And I'm reading, I was like, oh, I'm really excited. Oh, there's my book. And then I see one of the books is called Der Starken, der Stillen. Anybody speak German? I don't, so if I'm butchering it, you did once. Der Starken, der Stillen. And here's the book. And I look, and then I look again. I'm like, what? Underneath the title, it says, Jennifer will be talking about, my books are Quiet Influence, these two topics, and The Introverted Leader. But what did it say? The Art of Breastfeeding. Mastering the art of breastfeeding. Yes, exactly. So I, in my subtle American New York way, get on the computer and I say, Dirk, would you, I have sent you the copy, could you put the copy on your website exactly as I had written it? Wasn't the nicest. So he gets it, and what we're going to do is he's going to be up in the room, so he's going to say what happened when he sees this email. And I'm like, what? And he's like, what is she thinking? And he's talking to the rest of his team, and they're all of a sudden, they see the light, and they realize that what Google Translate did was to use the word breastfeeding, because stillen does mean breastfeeding, but it also means quiet. And so that was, so what I am going to probably say too is that I thought I sort of mastered the art about 30 years ago with my daughters, but my intention was not to deliver a course in the art of breastfeeding. So this was our first lesson in the disconnects that can happen and how language is so important in trying to figure that out, and they can go from there. So I just want to kind of give you a brief overview and then ask you guys a couple of questions here. So we'll have a slide up there, and we're going to just talk through what are the key factors. One of the things when having a successful global partnership is to first take self-inventory. Look at yourself and how motivated are you to spend the time and energy that it takes to create not just a program in the States, but to also deal with the language of the time, the cultural barriers that you're going to face. At the same time, what are you excited about? I had never been to Germany, and I had been to a lot of countries, and I didn't know a whole lot about it, but here was an opportunity that got me interested in going to Berlin. So what's exciting about that? What kind of global connections do you already have? And one of the things that we want to do both in NSA Georgia and also in the larger group of NSA is to say, how can we leverage the connections among us? And there are so many people, we have people attend there from all over the world. And just as we do here, and you guys are helping each other, that's how the founder of NSA, Cabot Roberts, said that we grow the business. The pie is big enough. So who do I already know? I've done work with people in Montreal and from in Canada and other countries, just who I've met through NSA. So who do we already know, not just through NSA, but in general? Then the second thing you want to do, and think about any of the partnerships you're involved in, is explore the market needs. You know, nobody really heard much about introversion in Germany, so it was a good topic to start introducing into there, and I knew that there was a quick turnaround on my books being translated, so I kind of knew that the market was good there, but I didn't really know how much interest there was. So learn about the country, connected to where might they not know about this topic, or might there be more of an interest. For a while I was speaking in Asia because there's a lot of interest in how we Asian people can adapt to Western cultures. We have a very extroverted culture. Asia is very much collectivist, it's more introverted. I got a call one day or an email from a guy in Paraguay, and he said, we have an introverted country. So now the culture can really drive that. Now why was that? Other factors, you know, they had a dictatorship for a long time, so of course they were introverted, and that had affected it. But there was needs, so where could you find needs? And what kind of partners might, you know, connect with you, where they have identified a need and you can fill it? And when I say partners, I mean consulting firms, universities, like you're doing, Alondra, with Georgia, is it Georgia State?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Finding your partner, that's a big part of it. You know, we know most partnerships in business, we hear fail. Right? So we wanted to find, what are we looking for in a partner? I had a good instinct about Dirk. I could tell we were the same kind of people. We laughed at the same jokes. He didn't speak much English at all, but I kind of picked it up that he had very similar values to me after a number of conversations. So you want to pick the right person and then make that decision. And then the planning phase also. We spent a lot of times on Skype, just as we did planning for this course. This program that we're doing at Influence, to really work through how do we want to share this message? How can we put together a model? So a lot of that was back and forth, and you know, partnerships have to be that. They have to be a part of communicating, giving and taking, clarifying the roles, marketing together. So he had a base already, and you know, good connections and had mailing lists, but I also had people who knew people. So how do we work together to spread the word? And how do I give him copy, you know, that he can then share? I also built in some other programs while I was over there. And then the delivery, that was quite an interesting experience. You know, I learned a lot about how people in Germany take training and learning so seriously. I had been to a writing workshop a few months before, and one of the speakers there was the famous novelist, you may have remember her, Erica Jong, who wrote The Fear of Flying, and she's written countless books and she writes poetry. And I had a chance to talk with her at the workshop, and I was just planning this trip. So I said, well, what are the people in Germany like? She said, well, I just got back. And she said, one great thing about them is they're readers. And boy, was she right. They were the most well-read group. The other thing I found is they were very thought-provoking, and people in Europe and generally question you. But they question you from a standpoint, an intellectual standpoint. Shows that they really studied the liberal arts. They have knowledge. And one woman asked me a question about introversion. She denied that it even existed. The next day, she came in and argued the opposite point. Just for the sake of engagement, of debate. They love debate. So I learned that all throughout it. Now, Dirk is also a facial and micro expressions person. So I learned a lot about that from him. He'll watch Kevin right now and he'll be able to tell you what's going on there. And without knowing the language, I knew a little Yiddish because my parents and grandparents spoke it. So there's some German words that I'd be like listening, but I really had to tune in when you're in another language to the nonverbals, right? To the voice tone. And the one thing I learned is don't be late, right? Because boy, I would get there my usual, half hour before the program. My hotel was right next door. They were all in their seats ready to learn. 30 minutes before. I thought, boy, we could have some companies here ready where we could take that lesson where they kind of wander in, right? And then we had a debrief. We debriefed. It's very important to do that afterwards. What worked and what didn't. One of the things we learned about what didn't work was that we had our poor Ruben. I call him Poor Ruben. He spoke English pretty well. He was an exchange student several years ago at the University of Florida, so he kind of had almost a southern accent. He was like really speaking English well. Well, we wore the poor kid out. By Thursday night, I had a session that Dirk volunteered Ruben come with me, where I was going to do a book signing for the publisher. So we get to the venue, and it's this like it was kind of a cabaret that was like, if you ever saw the show Cabaret, it was like below candles, and there was a woman that was running the cabaret, it was called a literary salon, and I sit down there, and Ruben turns to me and he says, Jennifer, I can't do any more translating. This was like right a minute before the program was going to start.
Oh, no.
It was just a small group. So the publishers graciously stepped in. But we learned, he was not a translator. This is the first time he ever translated. He did fabulously. But you have to have backup plans. And you have to look at when you're translating, it's a very exhausting process for people. And they're professionals.
Yeah.
So next time we know we would spend the money on doing that. So you learn all kinds of stuff. And then we continue to build on the partnership. We've become really good friends. We share resources. We're writing together. And it's been a joy. It's been an absolute joy. And you think about it on the global level. Who had the globe? That was Steve. About changing the world. And there's not much we can do about the politics, really. We try, but it's really about people to people connecting. And to me, it's such a joy to be able to have the gift of connecting with other people. I see your watch was over there. So are you done? Am I done with my time?
No, you're good. You got 20 minutes. You're good.
I know I'm all paranoid, right?
No. So we're not giving you feedback. So yeah.
All right.
No,
Oh, I
right.
thought you had a certain structure here. I'm being very German. Yeah.
I need to go, thank you.
I'm not taking it personally. Thank you. You told us several times. Thank you. So that's kind of the outline. So we're delivering the session for CSP. So I was going to ask you guys, what do you think? Yeah, well, CSPs are people. So it's going to be interesting to see I think one of the things I'm planning on with the session too, or we're going to plan on, is to leverage the group. Because we have people there who have been all over the world. So we are kind of starting and stimulating the conversation. So one of the things too that we're going to do, and I'll finish with this, is we put together some breakout questions on the back. You'll see these here, to stimulate some thought. So I thought maybe I could try these out with somebody here, just try a couple of them, and let's just see how it might work, so I can kind of think about that. Is anyone interested in doing work with a global?
Yeah, I am.
Okay,
Yeah,
Chris,
absolutely.
all of you are. Okay,
Yeah.
who wants to volunteer with me? Let's do a demo.
I'll volunteer.
Okay. So Chrissy, come on up here.
Oh,
Let's give her a
okay.
hand. You're gonna get a sticker for doing that. I should maybe wait till then.
What does it
All right.
say?
The introverts are leaders, baby. I have extras if you
I'm an ambivert.
Well, you can still take it.
Okay. It's still okay.
It's still okay.
You're still part of the club.
So Chrissy, let's get you to get a cue there as well. So there are a couple of questions, so you don't have to prepare a lot, but I'm curious, what global contacts do you already have? Can you think of any contacts?
Sure.
Share a little bit about that.
So I just finished my coaching certification, and I go through a pod group for 6 months, and that group was multinational. So there were 9 of us, 3 from the U.S., 4 from the UK, 1 from Italy, and 1 from Dubai. So great connections and really deep relationships developed with those individuals.
So you had a diverse group from
Yeah.
different countries, and you said that you had some connections, some
Yes.
tight connections. And just from that experience, are there any parts of the world that you're more drawn to from that experience, or just in general that you would like to explore a little bit more?
I think just in general. I think just the idea, I love the idea of figuring out, there are people that are involved in team coaching, there are people that are involved in assessment, so just trying to figure out what's the balance, where would I fit within a partnership, like how could we kind of balance each other out?
Alrighty.
Yeah, so it's not so much country.
Not by
specific.
country,
Yeah.
okay, as much. Well, let's talk about the market then a little bit, based on what you learned from that intense group,
Yeah.
are there any best practices that are happening in those countries where you see them more open to coaching or to the approaches that you're interested in?
Well, I think even looking at some of the things that you've talked about with countries that are looking to get a better understanding of Western culture. There are also organizations, or not organizations, but in Europe, you're starting to see a big swell of people really seeking to understand themselves a little better.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's less focused on the outside and starting to be a little bit more focused on the inside.
Okay.
And then how does that impact the rest of the world?
So you're
Yeah.
seeing a shift, that you've been looking at the trends
Yeah.
globally, and you see that Europeans are starting to do more of the focus
Sure,
that maybe
through my pinhole lens,
That's okay.
right? Yes, but
All
yes, that's the thing that it seems
pinhole.
I'm hearing.
So tell me about this. When you think about available resources you have for yourself, you think about time, you think about energy. There's quite a bit of investment.
Sure.
for doing this kind of thing. What do you have at your disposal right now, do you think?
So from a resource perspective, now is probably not the right time for me to focus on global expansion of my business, because my business has a lot of room to grow here in the States.
Okay.
That's low-hanging fruit. I have some really good partnerships here locally as well, and kind of building out that balance of coaching, training, and speaking. There are some areas that I can focus in there. So I would say probably for me, it's going to be a couple of years out before I really look to expand, and it may be opportunistic. It might not be as intentional.
Okay, that's a nice way to put it. So
Yeah.
opportunistic can just sort of, things can kind of come to you.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'd like you to think about is maybe, are there some things that you could be doing now that don't take a lot of time and energy to start getting yourself ready for that eventual long-term goal?
Well, so I think the biggest thing is continuing to make and maintain those connections, and having this conversation with those counterparts that are in Italy or in Dubai about what is it that's missing, what is it that I might be able to add value in an environment they're working in, or they may be able to add value in an environment that I'm working in. So just figuring out what that
Excellent.
mix looks like.
So staying connected with them will also be another way, it sounds like, to keep your pulse on what's the changing needs are, and developing relationships.
Right.
So, great, let's give Christy a hand.
Oh,
Thank you, Christy.
yay.
All right, have you come on up here, let's do another one. And then what we're probably gonna do is just have them do it in pairs,
Okay.
you know? But since you're here and you expressed interest, Kevin, I'm gonna put
Okay.
that on
And
you,
this is
okay?
just a group of CSPs that you're talking
Yeah,
to? Okay.
yeah, that's why I'm not sure it's gonna make a big difference,
I
because
don't
of
know
the
though, I think it
self-awareness.
could be.
What would you see as possibly?
I think most of the CSPs that I know
Mm-hmm.
are very, if they're showing up at Influence, let's put it that way. So a CSP that's showing up at Influence is very interested in growing. And I think it's very easy for us to kind of spread out in the immediate surroundings, but not stretch and be intentional about growing into the.
Okay, so I'm gonna push them.
Yeah.
We're gonna push them. So, okay, Kevin, let me ask you this. So, when you think about your content right now that you've got, you tell me a little bit about what that is, just in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, I talk about ethics, and primarily I talk about how small ethical slips can lead to criminal liability for corporate executives.
Yes, well put. Okay, so how small slips can lead to criminal liability. So how portable do you see that content?
Well, I think it's actually very portable. In May, I was featured in Financier Worldwide magazine as part of a panel that was obviously international. There were 2 Americans on the panel. I was one of the 2, and the others were from Europe and from South America.
Excellent. So what do you think, how did you shift your content to try to, or did you at all?
I didn't have
You
to,
didn't have
because
to.
the audience were primarily financial executives from multinational companies.
There you go. Excellent.
So now with international finance and corporations, it's very common for companies to have expats go to different countries and move around, and compliance and ethics become a common language within the corporate arena now.
Even though
So-
the laws might be a little different in each country.
Yeah, but you
Yeah.
can find, like, we have the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act here in the United States. In England, they have the anti-bribery law. Anti-money laundering has become very, very
Yeah.
huge. And
Good.
so it has been a common thread.
So what do you see as one step you could take to become more globally aware or increase your knowledge in speaking globally?
I would have to think about that a little bit. I'm
Okay.
really concentrating on getting my base
Here?
going
Okay.
here. But it's very easy for me to imagine that someone would be able to pick me up here as a speaker, expert, workshop leader, and send me to one of their subsidiaries overseas. And I think that's actually very highly likely. A
Excellent.
lot of my marketing is geared towards the general counsels of major corporations, and they generally lead the legal team throughout the world. And generally, the chief of ethics and the chief of compliance report to the general counsel.
So that just may be something you want to think about in your marketing materials and how you connect on social media, is just to include that knowledge that you have about global company. Then you don't want to make people guess, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
right.
you, Kevin.
Yep.
Great job. So, thank you, guys. So is there any feedback at all or suggestions that you have for what we could do to make this a strong program? Or any other questions? Yes, oh no, that's fine.
I guess I'm a little confused because I don't understand the ebb and flow of this. So why are countries seeking U.S. speakers? Why are they importing speakers rather than using their own native base? What does
Yeah.
that look like? And why would that be? Is that only in certain
Yeah.
knowledge corridors?
Uh-huh.
Or is that global? How does that work?
Yeah, I think that there has to be a demand for speakers that they don't have in their areas. And I think when we're talking about speaking and training, they're kind of different, okay? So, and my area that I've done mostly overseas, I've done keynoting, but it's always been with content followed up. So it'd be like
sort of training.
a master class, you know, a series of sessions. So there has to be deep knowledge, Kathy, as I see it, right? Some of the speaker bureaus will book NSA members for different keynotes, in and they'll spend the money on that and invest in that if somebody's a good keynote. Because it is going to be money, especially if it's like English is not the first language, because they have to invest in the translation and all of that. And it costs money, more to send people down. But it's really, there are different avenues that people go to make it work. Yeah. So it's really incredibly rewarding, I have to say. Travel in general is for me. So can I, anything else? This topic?
Wanted to
Yeah.
ask you about the whole translator thing.
Yeah.
My wife grew up in Germany,
Oh,
and
okay.
so I've spent quite a bit of time there with her friends and folks, you know. And what I found in a lot of the European countries is that a very large number of them speak English.
Yes.
And it's not a problem. More common with the business professionals. But I've also found that a lot of people that don't have that higher level don't speak enough English to understand and grasp the translations that, like you were talking about with the book. That type of thing gets very, very confusing.
Yeah, it's a tough
For 'em.
language too, John.
So if you were to book in Germany again, for example, would you insist that your client pay for the translator and make that as part of your contract?
Yeah, in this case, we would agree. We both are working together on it. But I have had all kinds of translations. I've had really poor ones, and then I've also had simultaneous translation. Do you guys know the difference between that? So, you know, the typical translation is I've had this mostly in Asia, where you'll say a few sentences, and then they say it in Vietnamese or in
Yeah, so you have to stop
every few minutes, yeah. Simultaneous is a real joy. I had that one, the Paraguay one, where they're in a booth. It's just like the UN. And the people and so your audience is reacting pretty much on time. Yeah. So I think translation, and the key with there's other tips on translation as well, that you want to make sure that you go over everything with whoever your translator is ahead of time. and slides.
Well, and it can trip you up, right? If you're hearing the translator. if
You
you're
don't
not-
hear them.
Okay.
You
so
don't
you're
hear them,
Always
so
in that booth?
you're just looking at them and then you can see, yeah, it's very cool though.
I
It costs a
always-
lot more to do that kind.
It's changed, you know, so I went to, I graduated from Emory,
Yeah,
and at my graduation event, we had Gorbachev speak.
oh wow,
And his mic and the translator's mic were at the same decibel level, and they spoke at the same time.
oh god.
And it was to the
It's a
field,
disaster.
which was horrendous. It was
Oh,
like,
wow.
That's all you remember about it.
That's right, yes, exactly. So because I can only imagine me as a speaker, because if my thought process gets interrupted, takes a little bit longer for me to come back. to
I
say-
did get a compliment in Germany. I think it's because I've spoken in a number of countries, and I was amazed. They said you speak slowly, so they can a lot of times your audiences will understand. And the reason we brought a translator in is because in a 5-day training program, they're not confident enough in their English
Right.
to go back and forth.
Right.
And so, and that's the hardest thing when you are doing a training class, when you don't speak the language and you're not getting translation all the time, because again, you're having to rely on cues, on your co-facilitator. It's pretty tiring. Training in general, but it's also
So
energizing.
Jennifer, I have a question about you personally and the path that your career took.
Sure.
So think back before
Uh-huh.
NSA and CSP.
Right.
What was
What was
the
I
driving
doing?
force? Yes.
Well, I was always working. So I come from a counseling background. But it was more in schools and education. So I started out as an elementary school counselor, and then I moved into working in higher ed, doing
Okay.
student affairs,
Yep.
career development, and that career development was my past. I was a career coach, and I worked in organizations doing career development in those companies you mentioned. And then I realized I loved training, and so I did a lot of that, but then I decided I really wanted to up the game. So that's when in 2008, I wrote the Introverted Leader, the first edition of this, and started focusing in on keynote speaking to be able to have that and raise my income, and invested in it, with joining NSA, with getting speech coaches, with writing. And I was very fortunate because my books hit at a really good time before introversion was very much talked about. So I've always been pretty good at looking around corners and seeing where the next opportunity is. So that's been really a joy. And I'm actually working on a new one. No, I'm crazy. But, so that's really answered, if that answers your question, Christy. And NSA has been a huge part of that growth and development. And what I'll say is not just joining, but connecting with all of you and asking for help from everybody.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to do that. I mean, that's the key. People are better than us, so in certain things. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So does that give you?
It does.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.